guess we'll click through. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to my talk. This is Hack 101 Alpha. This is the first version of the talk, so I believe there will be a feedback form afterwards that you'll be able to submit feedback for. A little bit about me. I'm a former ACM officer way back in the day. I'm here on their behalf and KnightHacks to talk about hackathons. I'm a UCF alumni, graduated in May, now studying human-computer interaction. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about me, I guess, a little bit more. The hacking spirit, hacker way, who hackathons are for, the admissions process, travel logistics, what a typical hackathon schedule will look like, how to build a team, ideation, where coming up with an idea for your project, making your idea a reality, and then getting that idea and project judged. And then we'll have a space at the end for questions and answers. So a little bit about me first. I have quite an extensive amount of hackathon experience. I actually started with KnightHacks way back in just 2019, back in the early spring. And I enjoyed them so much that I just kept doing them. I've since then won 8 times at Georgia Tech, MIT, and Cambridge. And since I've graduated from my bachelor's in May, I'm now ineligible to compete. So I decided to go, and a friend of mine at MLH said that I should try the mentoring and judging side. And I asked around, and both Johns Hopkins and UPenn said yes. So I got to mentor and judge for both MedHacks and PenHacks. And I loved it. So I'm probably going to keep doing that from now on. I'm also going to be mentoring and judging for HackMIT and KnightHacks. And we'll see about some of the other ones on that list. I've applied, but I haven't heard back yet. So probably the burning question for most of you is, what exactly is a hackathon? Is this cybersecurity? Are we hacking into the government? No, that's not. That's something else I do, but that's a little bit different, right? So there are a few variations on hackathons. They're all a little bit different, but they embody the spirit of hacking. And I always found it difficult to explain to people what it was until I went to a Facebook recruiting event and heard this quote. To sum it up, anything that has been built can be improved. And this is the hacker way, the way they do things over at Facebook and I guess Silicon Valley in general. One thing I'd like to, I guess, get out of the way is that a lot of people think that hackathons are for the highly experienced. The hackathons are about winning. The hackathons are about the prizes, the prestige, and that hackathons are the ultimate cutthroat competition. And especially looking at my background and assume all of those things. But crumple up that piece of paper that you've written all of that down on, and hackathons are actually for everyone. There's a little bit of something for everyone, even complete beginners. You can meet fascinating people, visit new places, create cool projects, play with cutting edge technology, learn new skills, and other things that I'll kind of go over in this talk. I really sell you on the idea of doing a hackathon. So again, I'm trying to get the idea out that, of course there is that competition aspect, but remember that there are more to hackathons than winning. But I guess I'll talk about that a little bit first. Way back in January, I went to MIT for a reality hack and won Volvo's best, what's it called? Volvo was a mobility track where we were doing augmented reality for air traffic control. They actually lost the giant check that they were giving everyone else. So they ended up taking a Sharpie and a workshop poster for it and gave us that. So it isn't really about getting those things, right? State Farm, I got a nice battery pack from them. Reality Hack, I got a nice pair of headphones, or sorry, not Reality Hack, but Hacklytics, I got a nice pair of headphones, the ones I'm actually wearing right now. And so there's all kinds of cool technology, and I just kind of figured I'd touch that first and get that out of the way. Owing to probably one of my favorite things about hackathons is the friendly atmosphere for it. Even if you don't win, it's fun to see and help others succeed. It's a thing of joy to see the other projects that people have worked on. And I've seen a lot of cool things come out of hackathons, right? I think one of the most interesting ones I think I saw was, I forgot which one it was at. I think it was Hack FSU. One of the other teams that was there, they worked on, I forgot what the name of it was, but this, if any of you have ever played the game Untitled Goose Game, where you're that annoying goose that goes around and messes with all of the villagers. They actually built a robot duck that does exactly that. It goes around and like identifies people and will like annoy people. I think one of the other interesting things that I saw was what's it called? At Penn Apps last weekend, I saw this thing called Xylophone Hero, where you could play a xylophone with your body, and you would put, move your arms up and down and play the xylophone, and the notes would come down kind of like Guitar Hero, right? A lot of cool things, and those are not things that I've worked on, but it was really cool to see them, right? And again, along that collaboration aspect, it ends up being that, a lot of times you end up in these giant rooms of just all like people, like almost I think everyone in this left picture is from UCF. And that was us at Swamp Hacks, all working on different things, collaborating and, helping each other out. Same thing here at HackGT on the right side. I believe the people in the front were actually working on something interesting. It was, I think, a embedded project where they had like this board with lights and they were trying to help people visualize quantum mechanics, which was really cool. From the kind of friendly aspect, again, there's always, hackathons aren't all work. You should take breaks and have some fun a little bit, and go to social events. On the left, you can see Camilla doing some yoga. On the right, you can see Christian and Jack actually playing, I believe, football and soccer. I didn't have enough space to put it in, but they actually have karaoke pretty often at events, and it was quite a sight to see Jose sing. So I think one of the most interesting things I've seen at a hackathon event-wise was, I think they had a full-on Nerf gun war where they had tables outside and they overturned them, and they had people like shooting over the banner, over cover at each other with Nerf guns. I think I've played. You'll often see, I think, Werewolf and those like social deduction games. So if you enjoy those, they have those there. I've seen, I think, escape rooms. It's more like, I've seen them more on the virtual side, but we'll probably see one of those in person sometime. I mentioned earlier, you get to meet fascinating people and visit new places. Now, that's not something you really get to do now with, I guess, COVID, but COVID won't last forever, and eventually we'll be getting back into doing them in person. I've met people from all over. I've met people from the United Kingdom. I guess even with the online format, you get to do the ones that are kind of not feasible to do, right? It costs, I think, maybe $1,000 to fly out to Edinburgh, the United Kingdom. So I didn't actually do that. But now with online, you can do them all over the country from, the comfort of your own house. But this year was actually when I went to Boston to go to MIT Reality Hack, and I met people there, who flew all the way from India. My friend here on the left, he's actually from Colombia. My friend here on the right is actually from Palestine. So people come from far and wide to do these often things. And since it's kind of expensive to fly around, I've only really done the ones, along the Eastern Coast, Atlanta, Boston, and New York City. But, quite a few in Florida. I think I've done Hack FSU in Tallahassee, Hackable at USF in Tampa, and of course, Shell Hacks over in Miami at FIU. One of the cool things you can do at hackathons is you get to use the cutting edge technology, right? Oftentimes there will be companies who come out and they have new tech that, their startups or things like that, or they really want people to try and work on, right? So it may be hard to try and work with those technologies before because, it's hard to get the hardware, but then you can try and, both at Reality Hack and then also I believe MLH has their hardware lab that they bring around. You know, you can borrow things like Amazon Alexas or Oculus Rifts, you know, powerful laptops to do things. And by virtue of getting to try some of these hackathons, you know, and you know, going in and be like, okay, you know, I want to go in and learn something. You can try and maybe even discover what you're really passionate about. How I got into human-computer interaction and AR/VR was actually from going to Reality Hack and then also doing more AR/VR at SwampHacks. I got to see the Magic Leap headsets, which are, you know, they're kind of hard to get your hands on, but I was very, very impressed with the platform, and I definitely see how it's the future of how we'll handle information. It just needs to get a lot cheaper, right? Another thing that I got to try was, you know, machine learning and data science over at Georgia Tech and Hacklytics, their Hacklytics competition, where I'd done some Python before, but I hadn't really done machine learning or data science, and then got to try that for the first time. And I did enjoy it, not as much as HCI, but it's something, you know, to think about. There are a few where I did some Internet of Things projects where I got to work on embedded hardware, where I believe it was Hacks over at Stetson where I got to borrow a particle IoT board, where it's kind of like this little chip here where you can, you know, wire up things to it using a breadboard and make little circuits. I believe I have a picture of that later, and I'll show that one to you later. But I got to try, you know, my hand at embedded hardware. So I think that hackathons provide an opportunity to try tech that one wouldn't really have the time, or I guess even think about trying, right? And it's okay if you don't have these skills up front. That's why we have, you know, mentors, workshops, and your peers to help you out. So there's mentors, they're there to help you get started, or if you get stuck. For Hack MIT this weekend, I'll actually be doing, you know, as a beginner mentor, where I'll specifically be being paired with beginner teams who are, you know, their first time hacking, and help them along with the process. Most hackathons have a similar process, or like, I guess they have like, I guess, a general mentor system, where if you have questions, you know, like, oh, is my idea any good? Okay, I have an idea. What kind of technology would I even use for this? You know, there are plenty of people who have a lot of experience to go and help you out with. And if you just kind of want to, you know, learn new things, right? You're early on in your career, or even if, you know, you're like me and you're like a lifelong learner who just really interested in learning new things, you know, they have workshops to learn new skills. When I was at Georgia Tech for Hacklytics, they had a guy from the New York Times who was actually a data scientist who talked about the challenges and solutions and that they were implementing over there. I think that was kind of a while ago, but if I remember correctly, they talked about, you know, A/B testing, which some of you may be familiar with, where, you know, if you're testing a new feature, how do you decide if it's a good feature, right? And they actually do this thing where they do A/B testing, where you kind of randomly give people one of the two and see which one does better, and you start using that data to automatically, you know, to give you data. But then if you're fancy about it, you can actually automate that process where the site will kind of auto-optimize itself for certain people, where people who tend to use certain more features, they'll actually see those instead of, you know, other features, right? There are other, I think, operational problems that they talked about, like, let's see, like, I think it was, they had a problem with trying to define
Rip.
If you don't send enough, then they run out, and if you send too many, then, you know, the newspapers get wasted. And owing to the whole peers thing, right, there are plenty of other people who are, you know, smart or have different experiences and different skills. And I think one time back at Reality Hack, I helped one of the teams with Unity game engine programming, because that's what I had ended up doing for senior design. And it turns out that one of the guys on that team was a former person from the Air Force. He did in-flight refueling. Like, if you've ever seen those planes where, you know, the giant, you know, fuel tanker planes, and they refuel the the fighter jets. That's what he worked on. And since we were trying to solve the problems of air traffic control systems, he helped us a lot out with the problems and kind of the way they do things in air traffic control. And since I've given it advice plenty of times and gotten a lot of helpful advice from mentors, that's actually why I'm a mentor today. Let's see. As we're all college students, right, there is nothing that we enjoy more than free food. At various hackathons, they always have food. This is not so much, even in the virtual ones, I believe I forgot which one it was, but I believe it was one of the NYU ones. During that, they were actually, during the virtual hackathon, having little raffles is like, okay, we can actually, you enter in and we'll send you a pizza or something like that, if you're one of the attendees. It's not, but there are other things besides just pizza. I've actually seen some hackathons kind of go above and beyond about the kind of food they have there. At HackGT, they actually had, I think, Vietnamese food the first night. So, like if you ever had like a banh mi sandwich, that was kind of crazy. And then you can see this photo of me on the left where I'm holding boba tea. They actually had boba. Some people got to try boba for the first time that day. Some people didn't like it, so I actually ended up drinking maybe 4 or 5 of those that night. You can see me in the picture with that. But specifically, actually, KnightHacks has done good work where they've done, I know most of you who are here at UCF, if you haven't tried it already, there's an excellent pizza place called Lazy Moon where they have these giant pizzas, right? And it was actually kind of funny seeing where last year, where they forgot to cut the pizzas, so all the organizers, they were actually trying to cut the pizzas. They had one pizza cutter, and it was funny to see. Probably very stressful for them, but very humorous in retrospect. And on the right side, you can see here at HackGT, and also last year at KnightHacks, they had Insomnia cookies. So those are very good. And unfortunately, because KnightHacks went virtual this year, we didn't get to see this, but I'm sure they'll try again for next year. They actually had a very special surprise for you guys. It was, I remember hearing in one of the ops meetings that they were gonna, I don't know if this is supposed to be a surprise, so stop me if this was. There was the food truck.
You can reveal the surprise.
Okay. It was supposed to be this food truck. They were gonna have it drive, if you've ever been between Engineering 2 and I think HEC, they were gonna have this food truck actually like drive up in between the two buildings, and they were gonna have like, fresh, hot, artisan like grilled cheese sandwiches. It was gonna be great. I think they'll be doing that next year, right? Or they'll be trying. Let's see. And also, as college students, let me go to the next slide. Everyone loves free swag, right? Almost every hackathon does shirts. I think it's very rare not to see them. You don't see that as much with the virtual, but a lot of them do still try to send them out. I haven't clarified with KnightHacks, but I think they're still sending out shirts, so look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll be sending out swag boxes and shirts to everybody who attends. That's
great, yeah. One of the things I miss most about the in-person hackathons is badges. I couldn't find my box, but the people who are here on the call who have seen me in the ops meetings, actually, when we were trying to decide how to do badge designs, I brought in like 8 of them. They're all different kind of color, different colors and designs, and they're really cool, and they're a nice collectible. I've gotten a few water bottles from hackathons. I actually have one here right now from Ryerson. I don't know if you can see it because I think it's showing my slides, and my background is probably messing it all up. But I think State Farm had this dog plushie thing. Some of you like plushies. The crazier ones I've seen socks. I was actually kind of surprised to see that from Google Cloud. And I think I saw pajamas from Disney Technology, right? Let's see. But speaking of those, one of the most important aspects of hackathons is, well, again, you're all college students, you're all trying to get, advance your career, right? You'll have top companies such as Disney, Google, PwC, Microsoft, Facebook, and Oracle at KnightHacks. And you'll see them at the career fair. You can impress them with the projects on your resume, and a lot of them end up being sponsors and judges, right? Some companies will actually do interviews at the hackathon. Last year at Shell Hacks, I believe JP Morgan did that, and there are quite a few people that I know that actually got offers straight from that interview, right? At KnightHacks last year, I talked to Electronic Arts. They were interested in my background and a few projects that I've done, and they gave me an interview at KnightHacks, and I ended up getting an on-site to go interview at their office. Their office was actually kind of crazy. It was like they had there was the EA Sports division, so they had like that Madden floor. I think the NBA floor, like with the basketball, and I think their conference room even had this crazy ball pit thing in the middle. But that's a whole other thing. So now that I've kind of tried to convince you that hackathons are one of the most fun things you can do, and that you should definitely do them, right? Let's talk about the admissions process. So yeah, there actually is an application form that you have to do for any hackathon. KnightHacks and Shell Hacks still have theirs open, and I definitely encourage you to apply early to those because spots are limited. Admissions are typically processed in the order they are received. A lot of them do them all at once. Some of them do rolling admission. I think Shell Hacks is doing rolling admission right now. But most of the time you'll see them do rounds, like round 1, round 2. They'll do like early acceptance and things like that. Whenever they open up, I'd say definitely apply first round and as early as you can if possible. Luckily with hackathons being virtual, then there's a whole lot more space now, but there's still limitations based on swag and things like that they can send out. So there are only so many slots, and you should definitely sign up for those really soon. Hackathons are virtual now, so I guess travel reimbursement is not so much of an important thing, but typically they'll have separate deadlines. They'll have one for people who are doing it for travel reimbursement. Those will be earlier because they need time to approve the funding and things like that out of their budget. And then they'll do another round, right after those go out if you don't need travel reimbursement. Typically, if you're close by, like if you're at UCF, right, you don't need travel reimbursement to go to the campus, right? And then those will be a little bit more lenient on the deadlines because you're not asking for money. So what actually goes in on the admissions process and the application form? I'll have your resume, your short answer questions, a shirt size and address, for your swag, and your diet restrictions, right? The resume is really just for the sponsors, I find. I actually thought that they used to put more weight on this, but last year at HackGT, because they had so many people apply and they only had so much space, I think of the people that I know that do hackathons, actually it was about a 50% acceptance rate, where they only accepted about half of the people that I know. And I think a big part of this is that they weren't the people kind of misunderstood the admissions process. That resume is really just for sponsors. I believe HackGT actually put out a blog post talking about what they were looking for in their admissions process, and they actually didn't read anyone's resumes. So I will say that probably the most important thing to emphasize on your admissions are those short answer questions, right? They're going to be things like, okay, why are you interested in coming to this hackathon? What kind of projects have you worked on in the past, and what made you interested in those? And really, what they're trying to get at is like, are you a fun person? Do you want to work on interesting things, or what are you interested in? Are you trying to learn new things? What's it called? Do you kind of embody that kind of hacking spirit that I mentioned earlier in the talk? I think one of the most surprising admits for HackGT was one of my friends who was a finance major. He didn't have very much of a coding background. So again, one thing I like to emphasize earlier is that, if you're a beginner who doesn't have very many however many technical skills or very much experience, you can definitely still apply and definitely get into those. He actually got into MIT Reality Hack as well, and that's how I found out about that and ended up applying for that, right? I think that having read both the HackGT post on what they were looking for in admissions and knowing him and his personal goals, and I think some of the answers that I asked him about, I think what they're really looking for is like, okay, they actually do weight a lot towards beginners, people who are looking to learn and get the most out of their workshops. I think Hack MIT, I've looked at it, I've seen so many people who got accepted from high school, right? There are people who I would say have very little to no experience and they get accepted to these because, they're going there to, do their best and learn new things and make cool projects, right? So I would definitely, emphasize those short answer forms. On here also, I've listed that, they have the shirt size and diet restrictions. The reason that those deadlines tend to be so early is because, they need to know how many shirts to order, how much swag to order, things like that. What kind of diet restrictions people have, like, oh, do we need vegan options? Do we need vegetarian options? I've actually seen forums asking if people are lactose intolerant or if they can't eat pork, things like that. It's good to help the advisors know what kind of food you can eat, right? You don't want to get hungry during the hackathon. So once you've been admitted to a hackathon, you have to go and get there, right? So you're going to travel to hackathons. Again, hackathons are quite virtual right now, but I'm very optimistic about their return to in-person. Typically, you do this one of two ways. You'll either drive or you fly. I definitely recommend driving if you can. Hackathons will typically give travel reimbursement for gas, and it's fun to carpool with your friends. And I think on the way to Hackable, it was me and a few of my friends, and we were just like playing a playlist of 80s music and singing along, and it was a lot of fun. And then also trying to come up with ideas for what we would work on. Let's see. I forgot to put it on here, but some of the hackathons will actually send buses out, right? Instead of doing travel reimbursement for certain schools. So for last year, ShellHacks actually was very fortunate to send us a bus, and their transpo director actually made me bus captain. So that was quite an adventure. A lot of fun though, because instead of it just being, carpooling, a few people in one car together, it's a full bus of UCF students. That was a lot of fun. Coming up with ideas, getting to meet a bunch of new people and talk about ideas and things like that. And that's actually kind of nice too, where if you're, instead of you're driving, right, and taking turns swapping and then, having to drive, somebody else is handling the driving. So you can just, you'll be dead tired on the way back. Hackathons are, always, stay up late a little bit. So it's nice to be able to get to sleep and not have to worry about that. The one thing that I will kind of emphasize if you do hackathons where you're going on a bus is that, be nice to your bus captain. I've had trouble like organizing everyone to because we needed all of them to come back with us, right? And then one person actually hadn't told me that they were not coming back on the bus. So we spent like an hour looking for them until someone told me that they were actually staying with their significant other at the college, because their significant other actually went to FIU. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then we were able to finally jet off after that. I'll touch a little bit on flying. This is not something that I think most of you will be doing, mostly because, you're college students and, it's expensive, I ended up flying using, rewards points. That's how I was able to afford that, because, flights are expensive. You don't typically get travel reimbursement for flights. I put a star on there because there are a few cases where they do offer that. I believe a few people that I know actually managed to go to California and do travel reimbursement for that. And that's actually kind of expensive because you're flying, across the country. That's actually very rare. I think I've seen maybe one or two people who do that. And then Reality Hack did travel reimbursement for flights, but they only did it for international. because they and they weren't covering all of it. They were only covering a portion of it, up to like maybe $100, because people coming from Palestine, Colombia, etc. One thing to keep in mind with traveling to hackathons is that, for the most part, Reality Hack was the exception to that because they did theirs across, I think, 5 days. But most of them are covered over a weekend, and you'll sleep on site at the hackathon. Some of them will have like cots or beds or couches you can kind of sleep on. You'll want to bring a blanket and a pillow. But one thing I will say is a very cheap but very wise investment. I think I paid about $20 for an airbed at like at a sporting goods store, and that came in handy a lot, because when you're going to be sleeping, right? Sometimes otherwise you'll be sleeping on the floor or something like that sometimes. All right, so now that we've talked about traveling to hackathons, we'll take a look at what a typical hackathon schedule actually looks like, right? And most of them are a 36-hour format. Some of them do 24 hours. I'll touch a little bit about that in a second. So the first thing is, you'll travel to the hackathon, you'll check in. When you do check in, you'll give them, your name, I believe sometimes your email address that you checked in under, and they'll ask for an ID of some sort, like a driver's license or a student ID. From there, you'll kind of wait around, kind of meet some people, wait for everyone else to get there, explore the campus a little bit if you got there really early. Like I got to New York, I think a couple hours early, and they're like, okay, we're not even ready for check-in. So I got to go explore a little bit of New York and go under see a little of the sights and get a little bit of their food first, right? After that, you'll have opening ceremony. During opening ceremony, they'll welcome you all here, talk a little bit of the tracks, the prizes, what the sponsors are looking for, give you an overview of your actual schedule, because every hackathon is different with how they do things. And opening ceremony is really the absolute deadline of when you need to be there, I think. Well, maybe not absolute. You can be late, but I don't suggest missing opening ceremony, because it's always a lot of fun seeing things, right? That'll be typically late afternoon or at night. I think most opening ceremonies, they run maybe 5 or 6 p.m., but I think they run sometimes really late. Like I think MIT's this weekend will be 9 p.m. It's going to be very late, right? After that, you'll do team formation. Usually they'll have a sponsor a career fair. This might be a little bit earlier sometimes. They might do this before team formation. Penn Apps actually did their sponsor career fair during check-in, actually before opening ceremony. I'm not sure when KnightHacks is doing theirs. I think it's after opening, is my guess. If someone can clarify.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but that's typically when you'll see it. I kind of ran out of a little space, but you'll probably try to do your idea formation. I forgot to put that in there. And then probably, maybe work on it a little bit and kind of get the structure of it settled, and then go to sleep. On Saturday, that's when the majority of your hacking will be. You'll have your various social events to go to. You'll have your workshops, to go out to and learn from, and of course, more sleep. I didn't put it on Friday, but then sometimes some of the more introductory workshops will be on Friday, but you tend to see most of them on Saturday. So try to plan out, look at the schedule on Friday and decide, which ones, you want to go to ahead of time, because sometimes they fill up, there's too many people in the room, and then, you end up standing, right? I think nowadays with the virtual ones, that's less of a problem, but I still think that they do our RSVP system, right, to kind of figure out how many people are going. So you'll be hacking through Saturday, and you can sleep. I guess that's technically optional, but I do recommend that if you can. One of the hard-earned lessons I learned after KnightHacks was that for KnightHacks, because I had my interview with EA scheduled, and also because, we were working on the project and I didn't have as much experience, I thought, this was a stay up all night kind of thing, right? And some people do that, but I find that even with caffeine, you're going to get extremely tired. And one of the things that you're going to have problems with, like, I think it took me 6 hours to write some very simple function that should have taken me half an hour at most, because I was so tired out of it. And if I had spent maybe a couple hours sleeping, I would have gotten a lot more of my energy back and been a lot more efficient with my time productivity wise, right? So plan for that. You'll probably want to wake up early on Sunday because your dev post submission will happen. It tends to be very early Sunday morning. I've seen it as late as 10, but I'd say it's much more common for it to be more around 8 a.m., 9 a.m. for submissions. So that's, like a write-up where you talk a little bit about the project, submit a link to your GitHub repo, and some people try to, if they have time, they'll do a video for it. Now that hackathons are online and virtual, I'd say that the video is a pretty much mandatory, necessary thing. I think every hackathon I've done virtually up to now has made that mandatory, but I guess technically you could probably just have a dev post and a live demo, but I haven't seen that happen, right? After that, they'll do judging. Judging tends to take a couple hours. I'll talk a little bit more about how judging works later, but after that, the judges will go back and deliberate for a bit, and they'll do closing ceremony. Well, they'll thank you all for coming. They'll present the prizes, the sponsors, things like that. A few hackathons will actually have closing keynote speakers. I think one of the most interesting ones that I had was at Penn Apps. They had a guy who did his PhD at Princeton. He worked for Carnegie Mellon now, but he worked on contact tracing for COVID-19. And a lot of the solutions, including something that I had tried before, that tried to solve the contact tracing problem, we're trying to rely on Bluetooth. But Bluetooth, by virtue of it being wireless, it doesn't really replicate the way that transmission actually works that well. Like, I think if I were to take my headphones and go upstairs, I could still talk to you guys, and you could still hear me because of my Bluetooth signal goes through the wall, through the walls and the ceiling and the floor. But it's very clear to you both, to you all, that if I had COVID or one of you had COVID and I was talking to you, right, you wouldn't actually get COVID from me. So Bluetooth is not really a good measure of how that works. But he ended up talking about how this really interesting advancement where they were using ultrasound instead, because ultrasound actually closely models transmission a lot better. Where, let's say if you were in a room and you're separated by plexiglass from somebody else, the plexiglass won't actually pass through the ultrasound. So if you detect someone through ultrasound on your devices, there's a good to fair chance that there was no actual barrier in between the two of you. I'm getting off track, I guess. After the closing ceremony, so there's a lot of cool speakers sometimes. I think another one at I forgot which one it was. Maybe it was KnightHacks. Talked about the one I just talked about just now was the one for KnightHacks for COVID-19, and the one for Penn Apps was a guy talking about the art of computer science and kind of how you should approach it. Afterwards, you go home, kind of just do the reverse of the thing I talked about before with the traveling to hackathons. Oh, actually, something on the slide that I didn't talk about before is that because of the way judging works, there's always a variable number of projects, and it's kind of really hard to account for how many projects you'll have at a hackathon. Often closing ceremony will be at a certain time on the schedule, but oftentimes it'll get delayed, right? When I went to HackTT, I had to fly for that because I would have taken the bus with everyone else, but I had to fly because I had a prior commitment to doing, I think, STEM Day, right? Where we were demoing all of our senior design projects to middle schoolers and trying to convince them to pursue STEM as a career. And I had already committed to that so I ended up having to fly. But on the way back, right, because I had scheduled my flight, based on the schedule they had given me, and because that was my first time flying out for a hackathon, I did not schedule any buffer time for that at all, right? Also, back then, I didn't have TSA pre-check, so they delayed, I think, closing ceremony by maybe 1 or 2 hours, right? And I remember sitting in the auditorium with everyone else. I'm like, okay, when is opening ceremony going to start? When are they going to start presenting all of the tracks and punches and prizes and stuff? And I ended up leaving in the middle of it because everyone else was like, Trello, you're being dumb. Just go. We'll tell you what happens afterwards. And I actually ended up missing my flights and getting bumped. So definitely be careful about that. There's a TSA pre-check where I think you go through the faster lines and things like that. You can check in, I think, online remotely. Try to do that if you're flying. But definitely, probably the biggest thing is just build in a couple hours for a closing ceremony. The delays. It's also nice to hang out with people and talk a little bit. So definitely do that. Let's see, where was I? All right, so once you're at the hackathon, you've done opening ceremony, you've done your check-in. Next, you do team formation, right? And I'd say that there are two approaches for how you're going to do that. You can either start with an idea and then build your team. Build a perfect team around that. Like you have your idea. Okay, does this person have the skills to put on this team? Oops, I'm getting a call. Let me answer that later. Sorry. Do the people, they'll have usually a team formation channel in either the Slack or Discord. Often they'll have team formation events that you can go to to try and pair up with people. And you'll kind of look at people's backgrounds. Like if you come in with an idea, which is not, you don't have to do that. You can kind of look at like, okay, do these people, fit what I need, right? The other approach, and probably maybe more fun to do, is you start with a team and you kind of come up with an idea, right? You kind of look at, everyone's different backgrounds, what kind of skills and experiences that they've had, and, kind of ask, what kind of ideas that you can build with the skills that you have with you, or skills that people kind of have tangentially that people can learn, right? So when I went to Reality Hack, I never actually worked with augmented reality or virtual reality before, but by virtue of having done a game for senior design, I had actually worked with Unity Engine before. And that actually ended up being the core of being able to just start with that and then just having to learn the augmented reality or the virtual reality parts and then doing that. I think I'll talk about it a little bit later, but when you're looking at the technologies you can learn, a lot of people have web experience. They've done React before, so they've never really done mobile apps. But if you've done React for the web, it's fairly similar to doing React Native for iOS and Android, which is for mobile apps. You're typically going to, when doing your team formation, you're going to draw on either the people or the people that you meet. There are plenty of hackathons where I didn't know people and I made teams. At KnightHacks, they were all people I'd never met before, and we ended up making a team and having a lot of fun with it. And I still talk to those people to this day, and that's true of a lot of the other teams that I've done. For Reality Hack, they actually had a rule saying that I don't think I've seen it at any other hackathon. They had a rule saying you can only team with people that you've never worked with before. So I think the first day was workshops, and it ended up being like, everyone was networking. It was all kind of crazy, and everyone's trying to figure out what the teams are. Where, throughout the workshops, you're learning new things and meeting new people, and you're like talking about, your background, the things you do. You're like, oh yeah, maybe we'd like to work together, right? When I say that you can start with a team and build an idea, right? Sometimes it's helpful, if you don't know anyone there, to just say, okay, my strategy now is we're just going to build a team of cool people who have, interesting backgrounds and see what, ideas come out of that, right? Camp versus COVID was the way we did team formation is actually they had different channels for kind of the different areas that people were interested in. And I think I was interested at the time about solving this was back in, I think, May or so. And I think, coming from like a startup and venture design background in addition to my technical, right? Because I've been interested in the kind of the business side of things. I was interested in how we could possibly help small businesses survive COVID. Turns out there were quite a few people that were interested in that as well. And we ended up making a team. winning first place. And that's actually now where the kind of side startup that I work on, that's actually where that team and stuff comes from now. But it doesn't always have to be new people, all people you know, or all people you meet. You know, at Hack NYU, it was a mix of new people and old, and people I'd known before, right? So one of the girls there, I'd actually met her at Reality Hack, and we had worked together and won. And she was from New York, and so when I ended up going to New York, I was like, oh well, hey, would you like to team together? That way I don't have to, try to find as many new people, because I'll admit it is a very difficult and sometimes a little bit of a frustrating process, right? But when looking at what, people, to try to kind of approach for teams, right? I think that diversity is key, right? You want people who have different technical skills on, because if you're all Java people, right? So, that's how, that's cool because you can all work on the same code, but, some people, like, who's going to build the front end, right? Who's going to build the website, that talks to your Java backend or something like that, right? You need different people with different backgrounds. And, I've met people who just do design work, right? They'll make mock-ups and stuff in Figma. There are people who their specialty is front end. They do front end web. Some people who do back end. Back end in augmented reality and virtual reality is more of what I do. There are some people who don't really do data science and machine learning, but they still have Python, so they can really do back end systems, right? Or vice versa, where they do Python, Flask, and you kind of teach them more of the machine learning, conceptual, and data science things, right? But probably core most to diversity more so than technical, because technical can be learned, is having different people with different experiences, right? When you go to a hackathon, right, I guess probably one of the more difficult things, more so I think than coming up with a team, is probably coming up with an idea, right? And if you have people with diverse backgrounds and having different, experiences, they'll have done different things and have different ideas to come up with, right? And, I think at MedHacks, right, I actually like seeing this where they had a lot of diversity, where they had, different people who had different backgrounds. Like they had, you had people who had medical backgrounds and they understood, the problem and the subject at hand. So that's what I call the subject matter experts. And you have your technical experts, right? It'll be very useful to have people who are, good at that. As I mentioned earlier, at Reality Hack, right? For us, even though he was on a different team, that person who helped us out, he was our subject matter expert on air traffic control systems because of his time in the Air Force, right? So definitely, consider, and if you have, kind of unique or interesting backgrounds, try to highlight those when you do your team formation, because people might be doing a medical idea and be like, oh, you worked in a nursing home, or you worked in an ER, or you did stuff with neuroscience, right? That's really interesting. I'd like to talk to you about, your experiences there, and about your, because we maybe have an idea that, could draw on that expertise, right? So like I said earlier, ideas are the hardest part, and, having a good team is for that. So once you have your team though, how do you actually come up with the ideas, right? And I think the biggest issue I see that with teams that go in and compete is they're not solving the right problems, right? I think I was very fortunate to, be interested in the business side of things. So on a whim, this doesn't actually, unfortunately, count towards the CS degree here at UCF, but I took venture design. And that's all about, how do you go about starting businesses, right? And perhaps the most important thing that I learned in venture design from Michael Pape, who is a Booth MBA, who was a former biotech, entrepreneur and venture capitalist. So he's definitely had a lot of experience. And he kind of boiled it down to FPS, frustration, problem, solution. I think business people do it a little bit differently, but he's kind of unique because he also has a PhD from Purdue in one of the sciences, I think biomedical. So he actually has kind of more of an evidence-based approach to entrepreneurship, where, you know, do people have frustrations? What kind of data do you have that shows that, right? Because a lot of people, when they come up with ideas, they just kind of they go straight to just coming up with the solution to things, right? And you'll have this problem, what I call a problem in search of a solution, right? Because a solution in search of a problem, right? Where you've come up with a solution, but it doesn't really solve a real problem, or the problem, you know, like you're misunderstanding how the problem works, right? But to get to that point, I guess I would say you would think about what frustrates you, or what frustrates you, people you know, or things like that. And that, you know, the frustrations that people come up with, you know, tend to come from very specific subject matter backgrounds. But you can also have people who do just, you know, just the general frustrations of everyday life, right? For our project at KnightHacks last year, that came out of, if any of you are familiar with, you know, on campus, I don't know how many of you have, you know, driven, but one of the most frustrating things about campus is probably finding a parking spot and just dealing with trying to park, particularly in the very beginnings of the semester, right? And that frustration was, you know, paramount. Like everyone we talked to at KnightHacks, they're like, you know, and the people who are alumni, they all understood this frustration, and like, you know, they really liked the project. We didn't end up winning, but I think that we were trying to solve, you know, something that was important, like problem, right? And the problem that was evident from that frustration with parking was that it was difficult to know where there would be spots, right? Nowadays, I think they actually did have like I think a website or app that does do that now, but at the time, there wasn't really a thing for that. I think there was maybe just a website. And a lot of people that we know, UCF is one of the largest schools in the nation, right? So that's why there's so many people competing for spots. But one of the things we are is a commuter campus, right? There's actually quite a few people who don't live on campus or don't live near it. So a lot of people actually travel from quite far away. I think, I don't know, I think Jack and Harold, I think they used to live like an hour away, right? So if you're looking at for spots, right, you know, what spots might be available, or which area you come into the campus might be different. So we ended up building kind of like a drawing from my business background again. We did this thing where we were doing a seasonal prediction to kind of, where we consider each hour as kind of like, I guess, a season, and then look at and try to predict based on historical data, which times would be more busy for certain garages, so that you kind of have an idea of which garages to look for at certain times. Like you could ask the voices, like we had built a voice assistant bot, what time, you know, what a certain garage, how full it will be, or which garages should I look for at a certain time, right? Owing again to the frustrations, I believe one of the things, the design considerations we had made for that project is we had made it a voice assistant, because, you know, it's kind of annoying to try to use your phone while you're driving around. That's frustrating. So we had thought about, okay, we wanted to be completely usable entirely as a voice system, right? Let's see, some of the other projects I've worked on. Let's see, Fetch. That was, I believe, HackerHacks. So my girlfriend at the time, actually, her dog had escaped out the door, and it gotten lost. So that was a very, you know, frustrating experience, and that's what led to the inspiration for a system where we kind of had this idea of trying to track dogs, you know, or track dogs or pets or of any kind, you know, around so that they could be found. And we ended up thinking about, you know, the frustrations that people would have and the existing solutions that existed. And what people had problems with those is that, like, I think they relied on GPS. So they tended to use a lot of energy, because you're talking to, you know, a satellite up in orbit, or receiving, you know, communications from a satellite up in orbit. And some of them did rely on, I guess, 3G as well for the location systems, but that's also still kind of expensive, because you're using, you know, the cell towers to do your location. So we thought about, you know, what kind of ways you could use to track certain devices, and they actually had some new Wi-Fi standard that allows you to do location for Wi-Fi, but that wasn't out yet. But then, having thought about it a little bit, Wi-Fi access points are fixed locations, right? So if you have like the address, I think, what do you call it, a MAC address, a hardware address of any individual access point, you can actually determine a rough location in 3D space. And that's actually why Google Maps, they have those cars that drive around and take the pictures. They actually do scan the Wi-Fi points for that, all right? And they record where those locations are. So you can use those Wi-Fi access points to determine a rough location. And when you're looking for a dog, you don't need the exact location. You just need a rough area to begin looking for. So it was a very power efficient, method, and we ended up winning a prize there. Best use of particle IoT. One last example, right? Because I think we've spent like an hour, but we have 2 hours, right? Was Fairfilter, which was the one for Hacklytics, right? The data science and machine learning competition. I had never done too much before with machine learning, but owing to a workshop I had seen at Shellhacks, I at least understood what was possible conceptually with machine learning, where a lot of they talked about the various types of systems you might have, where you might have a prediction system where you put in data like for a variable, and then you try to predict what that variable might be, like let's say the parking system as well. Or like say you're trying to predict how many, again earlier the example with how many newspapers you're sending out, or how many products you should make, or how many returns you're going to get. But the other way you can use machine learning is something called classification, right? So you can give it something and that you don't know what it is, and it'll classify for you what something might be. I think I've seen the examples for that as like, I think numbers is the example. Like if you give it a handwritten digit, you can build a machine learning model that'll classify it as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. I think I've seen one worked on where, it's like classifying different breeds of dogs, things like that. There are more applications of machine learning, but those are the 2 most common that I see, right? So the day before the competition, I actually did I still didn't have an idea, because it helps a lot if you can try to come up with an idea first, because then you can just build a team all around that. I had done a interview for Carnival Cruise Lines based on some work I had done at a previous hackathon, Swamp Hacks. Because at the time, I had a desktop, but the desktop didn't have a camera on it, and I didn't realize back then that, COVID was going to happen and everyone needs cameras, so I didn't bother to get one. So for my camera use, actually, and that's what I'm doing now, is I just use my laptop, right? And I plug my headphones into that. But my laptop sits in front of my desk, in front of my desktop, so I can actually see my normal screen. So after I was done with the interview, I actually moved my laptop, and unfortunately, I dropped it straight on the floor. And because the headphones were plugged in, it snapped the pin straight off. So I'm like, oh, well, now I need new headphones, right? So I go on Amazon and I start looking at, product reviews for things. And I sort by, I think, average product review, because, I want some good headphones that are, decently cheap. I go in and I start looking at it. And I find these, knockoff headphones, or not really knockoff headphones. I think a few knockoffs in there of like the earpods and things like that. But I find a few wireless headphones that, I'd never heard of this brand, but they've got maybe 90 5-star reviews, right? So I think to myself, okay, I'll go look at the reviews, right, and see what people have to say about that. And I go look at these reviews and I start noticing something odd. Each of these reviews are like, oh, these are the greatest gloves ever. These are, this will be, a perfect rake for your garden. What's it called? This is the best stationery I've ever had. And it dawns on me that all of these reviews are fake, right? That's why this, product is up so high. And I was like, wait, how is this happening, right? Amazon is one of the biggest companies in the world. You know, they hire so many software engineers. Certainly they have a system to, you know, to track these, right? To figure out that reviews are fake. And having done a lot more thought about it at the time, and then it dawned on me right there in that moment that the way that they're beating the, you know, the machine learning algorithms that Amazon was using was they were using real reviews from other products, right? And it seems that, I'm guessing that what Amazon was doing is they're only detecting real or fake reviews based on, you know, real or fake review, like they only classify real or fake, right? So I think that somebody had figured out that you could take reviews from other products and then use those as fake reviews because Amazon's classifier would not recognize that, right? And that's, I guess, one of the problems with machine learning, where if you don't consider edge cases like that. So we ended up building, recognizing this problem. Like I actually went up and, you know, if you do a generic search for any various product that has generics, right? Like headphones or like speakers or any, you know, various electronics products, you'll find that this is rampant on Amazon, right? We ended up realizing though, so then why is it obvious to us, right? It's completely obvious to us. And it turns out that the reason it's obvious to us is because they're completely irrelevant reviews. They're not related at all to what the product is. And we didn't have enough time for it to actually build, you know, a model that does more relevance to individual products. The way we ended up doing it at the hackathon was we realized that, you know, because they're so wildly off, you can build a classifier instead that'll take an Amazon review and say, okay, what product category does this fit into? Does this fit into, you know, electronics? Is this cosmetics? Is this, you know, food and grocery? Because, you know, I mean, I'm not going to be talking about, you know, I'm not going to be eating gloves, right? I'm not going to be, you know, writing my letters and, you know, on my speakers, right? And that ended up working out pretty well, right? We ended up finding a data set for that Amazon published, and, you know, and cutting that down, and then, you know, getting rid of a few of the more problematic categories, right? I'm not a machine learning expert. I think you should definitely talk to the AI club for that. But I think one of the problems that we encountered was you have to consider, there's a thing in machine learning called a confusion matrix, where, you know, certain things are classified as something, and then you can, I probably should have put that picture in this slide, but like, let's say you have a review for an appliance or like an electronics or something like that, and it gets misclassified as, you know, a TV show or a movie review. It'll show you the confusion where the machine learning model is being confused across it. We ended up finding that most of the confusion ended up coming from, I believe, TV shows and movie reviews, because in TV shows, the plots always have various different things that, like I'll talk about, oh man, I love that moment in the film where this guy shoots the other guy. I don't know, complete spoilers, but, or like this guy, wins in the end. It's a very inspiring movie, things like that. But then they're like all over the place, right? So if you end up getting rid of those specific categories that are more, harder to kind of reason about for reviews compared to, say, like, electronics, which are like, oh, they'll talk about, it didn't work or it didn't turn on. Those will always be the, similar kind of reviews, right? For a certain category. So you only keep those and that's how we improved our accuracy from like 60% to maybe, I think, 90%, which was pretty good at the time. But we were using an older data set that didn't include all the new categories. So when I tried again later to do it with Amazon's new categories, it turns out because the new data set had all of these, I guess, wrong training labels, it ended up not working that well, and I only got like 60-70%, and it doesn't work very well at all now. So I think that, but I guess if Amazon put in the time and effort to, they could actually go and manually label this data set and fix all of that, then they could probably do that. But you know how it is with scammers, right? It's a ongoing war, so there'll be new approaches. Well, they'll probably just use existing reviews from other products that are in the same category, and it's just like an arms race, right? but I spent too much talking about that one project. So let's talk about one of the other big mistakes that I see with hackathons, right? 36 hours, it might sound like a lot. It is not. From my experience, not a lot of time. You know, you got to sleep, right? For the ones that are 24 hours, even less so, right? So one of the things that I learned in venture design was a thing called minimum viable product, which I'll kind of adapt a little bit for hackathons, and I'll call it minimum viable concept, right? You're going to want to cut anything that isn't core to the idea, because at the end of the day, what you're going to be doing is, you know, you must be able to demonstrate the core idea. Anything else is extra polish and it's just a nice to have. You got to keep asking, you know, does this feature actually help me demonstrate this, right? Does this core, like, okay, so like, let's say if the core idea is, I don't know, oh yeah, this is the project from before where we did Fetch, right? The pet tracking systems, right? And then we're at HackerHacks. So we had decided, I think, that core to our ideas were, you know, we needed to be able to, ability to track, you know, an animal of some sort, right? It had to be able to, you know, move, right? We couldn't, you know, build a tracking system with Bluetooth on a computer, right? Because, you know, that's not really, you know, something you would attach to a pet. And then we needed to be able to show that, you know, it would track the pet across multiple different networks, right? That one was a bit more difficult, right? And at first we thought, okay, maybe we don't need that. But when we think about it, we go back to, you know, minimum viable concept. We need to demonstrate the idea that we're tracking across multiple networks. So one of the things that I'll also advise on is that you want to kind of be a little bit of a showman when you can do your demo and try to show off a little bit and do something, you know, out of the box. And one of my teammates, Alex, he had this crazy idea of, you know, I had mentioned, you know, I don't know how we're going to simulate losing multiple networks unless we had like a Faraday cage. And then Alex is like, well, why don't we build one? So he took a bagel box from one of the things that, you know, one of the things with the food, right, that they were giving out at the hackathon, and a bunch of tinfoil from one of the other, I think systems where they had a challenge to do makey work. So like they were building circuits and stuff with tinfoil, like, and he'd take a bagel box and cover it in tinfoil and built a Faraday cage to simulate, you know, the, you know, losing of signal and going across different networks, right? And, you know, people love that during the demo, right? But it would never have occurred to us that we would need to build this Faraday cage without the, you know, coming back to that, you know, does this, you know, feature, does this help us demonstrate the core idea, right? I probably should have put in more examples of various things that we've worked on. Yeah, there was one that we worked on at Swamp Hacks where we did some augmented reality systems for wayfinding, where you kind of, you know, you're on a moving cruise ship and you're trying to figure out where you are and where you're going. Originally, we wanted it to be like it's kind of like this line that you follow, and it tells you where to go that way, and it's deploying, you know, across the like I guess the floor of the library, because we weren't, you know, on the actual cruise ship at the time. But it turns out that, you know, that's actually very hard to do, to set up a line, like a line system, and then figure out how to do all of that. So while we had pathfinding systems, we ended up having to simplify it. Okay, well, we just really need to be able to show the core idea, which is we can show a guest how to get around the cruise ship. So we ended up finding this, I think, 3D model of like a 3D arrow, and then just kind of rotating that in certain directions based on the direction that people were supposed to go at, right? So once you've kind of decided, you know, I mean, well, that's just something you should think about, you know, up front. What is core to your idea, right? You should try to think about that throughout the project, right? You need to go out and, you know, build that idea, right? And these are a few of the technologies that I've, you know, the common ones that I see. But for what a lot of what makes for a good hacker is really just knowing what's out there, right? I probably should have spent more time thinking about the technologies I've used and probably put more of the more interesting ones in here. But I think that, you know, being interested in tech and going to workshops and things like that is how you're going to find these technologies. I mean, there are the common core base technologies you have here, but the technologies that I ended up using at, I think KnightHacks was, I went to a Google workshop on how to use Google Dialogflow and Google Actions. And they taught us how to make like a little bot that, you know, if you had a bike repair shop, how you would, you know, write the code so that it can respond back and give you the times and hours for things. And we were talking about, you know, the issue of doing parking, right? We thought about, oh, wouldn't it be annoying to use an app? But then we thought, oh, wait, you can use hands-free, you can use audio. Because, you know, I had done this workshop and it was like, okay, this is a technology that's available to us, right? I don't know, I spent a lot of time, because when I started doing hackathons, I actually spent a lot of time looking at various companies and the APIs that they put out. A few of our ideas, like later on that we did at HackFSU, we were familiar with how I think Microsoft and then Google both had like what I call like face APIs, where you could take a face and it'll recognize the emotion that someone's giving off. And one of the people that we had met at HackFSU actually had autism and also what's called facial blindness, where they couldn't, you know, they had trouble, you know, recognizing people's emotions, and then also, you know, recognizing who people were. They actually talked about how, like if you change your haircut, they'd actually might not recognize you, might think you're a different person. And those technologies, I remembered them, and they played into the, you know, our solution for what we ended up making, right? I think that with pen apps, their theme was music. So a couple of people, you know, they had this idea. It was like, okay, what if you had, you know, music to fit your mood? And there were a few people who used similar emotion APIs for that. I think that the augmented reality system that we used, Vuforia, that one was one that I had heard about from people at, you know, at Reality Hack, because PTC, the company that makes it, actually had a booth there, and then, you know, they were talking about, oh, you guys should use Vuforia. That's how we learned about it. And they did a workshop, but I ended up missing that. So I ended up seeing that technology again at Swamp Hacks, and we were like, oh, we should use this technology for our project, and that's how we ended up doing that. Let's see, what other things? Yeah, so it's good to like kind of have at least, you don't have to have experience with them, but do try to keep an idea of the APIs you see and the kind of cool things that people say, oh, have you seen this new library that does this or does this, or have you seen this new cool data set for this? I think one of the hackathons that I did, we didn't end up submitting because we ran out of time and didn't, you know, end up completing the project, but it was a interesting idea. My friend and I, we worked on this project for back when COVID first started, right? They had like a website, or like I guess a data set of all of the places you could get free food during COVID, because originally the way people would get food is they would get food through, you know, their schools and things like that, or schools or their community centers and things like that. And that's how they would get their meals. So we had this idea of like, because I had seen this data set before on, I think, Hacker News, right? I'm like, oh, here's a website with all of the list of different places, right? But then it's actually difficult to use that. So we ended up having this crazy idea of trying to scrape the website and putting that into an app that, you know, to make it easy, where you put in your location, like, okay, here's, you know, a middle school here nearby. For if you're a middle schooler, you can go there. If you're a senior citizen, here are some community centers near you. It turns out that scraping that data set was a lot harder than we thought because of the way that website was set up. It was all surprisingly, horrendously inconsistent, but the idea would count, right? And that would have worked, I think, with a website that was more structured for it, or if we had more time to work out the individual differences between each subsection and how they were doing their headings and stuff like that, right? So I guess I'll talk about the web front end as well. You know, you'll see web, you'll see most of what I see is React, Bootstrap, Angular, I'll see often. That's a little bit more rare, but there are people who do that. For mobile, I see people who do Android or iOS direct, like they'll do Java, Kotlin, things like that. iOS, you usually see Swift. I've seen some crazy people try to do things in Objective-C, and I don't recommend doing that, but you can. Owing from the web background, like I said earlier, if you have React experience, there is a thing called React Native for Android and iOS where you can use React code or React JavaScript code to make mobile apps. There's a new thing on the block now, I think, called Flutter. That's something from Google. It's written in Dart, which I've never used it before, but I've looked at it and it looks very similar to JavaScript, but it seems to be more of like a purpose-built language for that, right? And it's the same thing where it's cross-platform. You write the code once, it'll be the same thing, a cross-platform like how React Native is. You'll write it for once and you'll put it on Android, iOS. When you go to hackathons, at least in person, I think it's a little bit harder with the online format. But if you have your own embedded hardware, you can look at using hardware, right? One of the things that I had gotten from, I believe, Swamp Hacks, they were nice enough to give me a Raspberry Pi and and a screen. But Raspberry Pis are actually pretty cheap. They're the $5 computer, or $35 computer maybe. I don't remember exactly. That you can go and you can go buy one and you can do like little bits of embedded work. And because there's such a large community, there's a lot of tutorials and mentors and things who have worked with it before that can help you out. Owing to hackathons being friendly to beginners, if you don't have coding experience, you can use Figma to do your design mockups, or if you have a really rough looking front end, or just don't have a designer, or you don't have like a person to actually do the time to do all the CSS and stuff like that, you can do mockups of what it would look like as an actual design, right, in Figma. I think you should try to go for interactivity, right, when you're pitching, right? So if you can, at least kind of graduate from Figma up until low code, no code, where you can kind of like, I guess, if you ever use things like Scratch or like using Unity or Unreal blueprints or things like that, where you kind of have like that visual interface for putting into code. That way it'll actually be running code and actually doing things, but you don't have to have as much technical experience for that. Right. But again, try to go for a diverse team and have people with different backgrounds for that. For the back end, you'll usually have like some kind of cloud system, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Azure, Microsoft Azure. Often you'll see IBM or Oracle Cloud. They'll often be sponsors, and they'll actually sometimes have their own sponsorship track for that, where they'll try to pick the best projects that use their specific technology, right? And that's a good time to learn, the little kinks and quirks of working with different cloud platforms, because not every company uses AWS, not everyone uses Google Cloud, they use different things. While I'd say that conceptually cloud is, transferable across different backend technologies, they have their differences, right? A lot of times, some people will. And then how do you put stuff on there? So often there'll be, Node.js or Flask, or like Python Flask or Django. Those are your like kind of backend frameworks. If you've done front-end web, then Node.js is also JavaScript, pretty easy to come up and do. If you've done machine learning, then you can do Flask or Django, right? To do machine learning or data science, I do see that quite a bit at hackathons. You don't have to. It's up to you if you want. I definitely see those with TensorFlow, scikit-learn, but there's also the cloud backend systems where you can actually. I think that's how we did it for Hacklytics, where we did two approaches. We did a scikit-learn model, so we actually built a regular machine learning model, but then to help with our accuracy systems, we actually took all of our tag data and we pushed it to Google Cloud and had them train on an AutoML model on that. And that's where I think our 90% kind of comes from. But we still had to kind of, clean the data and, and decide which categories we wanted to do to get to that point. But the biggest issue, though, for doing machine learning and data science is that, to train a model, you actually need data to put into it in the first place, right? So where do you get this data? There'll be various data sets. I think Amazon publishes theirs. I think the government has a repository of data sets. But you'll often see people pulling them from Kaggle. And Kaggle is this online, I guess, machine learning competition place where people can, do, train machine learning models on sample data, and then, they have little leaderboards and stuff. It's also a good place to learn because, they have, people will do write-ups on how they did theirs. That's actually how I ended up learning more about doing actual TensorFlow, things like that, where there's their sample kind of competition that they have. It's actually a data set from the Titanic, where given the, person's name, how much they paid for their ticket, what deck they were on, if they were married or not, did they have kids or relatives, what their occupation was, you could actually build a machine learning model that would predict whether or not they would have survived, the Titanic. And that one was actually really cool to see, and the approaches that people did for that, right? It's a very basic competition, but it'll teach you things like, feature engineering, where you're gonna take different things and try to, or create new features. What I call features are like, I guess data points that you're trying to train on, because there are certain things that may not be obvious to a machine learning model that you may want to just kind of help the model along, right? Where, let's say, if you have how much they paid for their ticket, you can, some people don't have which kind of area or section they were on the ship, but you can, based on the price of their ticket, kind of figure out, oh, okay, this person must have been in this deck based on how much price they paid, because, the lower decks, the lower down you were, the harder it is to get up, to the main deck to go onto the lifeboats, because the water is coming up. Yeah, so that's definitely a good place to learn feature engineering and data science and things like that. So then, now that you've built your idea, right, you go on to judging, right? And I'd say that right now it's online, right? So, but I'll talk a little bit about in-person before talking about the virtual formats. There's the Expo Science Fair style, where every team gets a different, table. They'll set up your laptop, things like that, and the judges will come around and they'll, hear from you about your projects. One thing to note about this is that there will be time, you have to be careful with this. Sometimes you won't have, an outlet. So if whatever you needs power, right, or you have like a thing that runs very sluggishly when you have a laptop, be considerate of that, right? You're going to have to ask for one, either power, or a lot of times your organizers will just be like, well, sorry, your table is in the middle of the room where there's no outlets, so you're just kind of on your own there. That's the most common way you'll see it done. Different, who stand around, and both the judges and also, hackers who are interested in your projects will come around and ask you questions, right? The other one that I've seen is presentation style, and you don't really, this is really only at the smaller hackathons, but sometimes if you make it to top 10, you'll do something like that, right? Where you'll do a presentation to everybody, right? That's where, instead of, having the science fair style, you'll actually go up on a stage and go demo it in front of everybody. And you'll probably have power there, but the way you demo is a bit different when you don't have that back and forth, right? So you have to keep in mind that you might have to demo presentation style, right? So now I'll talk more about virtual format, which we'll be seeing, here for Shell Hacks, and then also for KnightHacks. Typically, you'll see that that'll be the submission video, right? Videos weren't really necessary before. I'm sure they were helpful before. I don't think the judges really looked at them before. They were actually basing it almost entirely on your in-person judging. But now that they have, the online format, it's just, you can't go around and do that anymore. So keep in mind, I guess, when building your team, if someone has video editing experience, that will probably come in handy, right? Some hackathons will do it just based on the submission video, but some will actually have, they'll actually have Expo Science Fair video rooms. So they'll actually still have you kind of try to, present to a panel of judges, right? That they come around and ask you questions. So it'll still be kind of a similar way to it is in person, right? You'll usually get a few people that'll be general judges, and but then you'll have sponsor track judges as well if you entered certain challenges or things like that, where they're only concerned with, you know, does your project fit into our specific track, right? So in talking about that, right, what is it the judges are really looking for? Impact, feasibility, technical difficulty, and novelty. I might edit this a little bit more because, you know, I've only been on the judging side twice, but I think that this is both what I thought, you know, they were looking for, and then also what I was personally looking for when doing hackathon projects. So I'm thinking about, you know, how much impact will this project have? You know, one of the mistakes that I made with at KnightHacks was we talked about how, you know, this is going to be great for our local community. Like, you know, everyone who's going to have issues with parking, you know, it's going to make things a lot better, right? But we didn't consider that this could actually have wider impact. And a lot of people are more concerned with that wider impact where, you know, if we're wasting less gas, we're having less emissions, you know, that would be helpful for the environment. I don't know, you could have people, you know, what's it called? You could use up fewer parking spots so you can accept more people into colleges and maybe increase educational accessibility. Some of those are a little bit more on the stretch side, but you kind of see what I'm talking about, where you can try to think about the bigger possibilities for impact, right? Especially when you're doing, you know, your sponsor track judging, right? Where I actually didn't know, because I didn't do the dev post for that one. I didn't know we were signed up for, I think, JP Morgan's Code for Good. So I was pitching to them as normal, but didn't realize I should be kind of framing it, you know, in terms of kind of this social or environmental impact that can be happening, right? And part of it will also be feasibility, and that's, I guess that's part of impact in a way, but it's how feasible would it be to continue this? How feasible would it be for real world implementation? Like, does it seem practical? Does it have the teams really consider the problem at hand? Like, that's why you really need a subject matter expert if you can get one, because they can, you know, they have the authority to speak about, okay, this is how it would work in the real world. This is how we would apply it, and this is how we would solve these real world problems, right? They'll look at technical difficulty. Has it been, you know, what kind of technologies did you use? How are you newcomers? Are you beginners? Have you done things like this before? I think one of the ones that won at Oxford Hacks that I was competing up against, they actually did, it was their first term doing augmented reality, and then I think that weighed in a lot heavily to why they ended up winning, I think, best use of AR, right? Novelty, has this been done before? Is this something I've ever seen before? I think one of the most interesting ones for a hackathon project that I've ever seen was, you know, it doesn't really fit into the solving problems thing, but it was just so novel that they did extremely well at KnightHacks. I believe this was Anthony's project. They worked on it, and they ended up getting third place. They had this kind of system where I think it was like this brain muse sensor thing and maybe a galvanic skin response sensor that checks how much you sweat. And they made this machine learning model that would generate music based on how you feel, like directly, you know, physically. And, you know, that might sound really okay, right? But I guess part of what I was talking about earlier about the showmanship thing was, they had one of the most, I think, impressive demos I've ever seen, where he goes up on stage, they start hooking up the devices to him, and, you know, they start playing this really calm, you know, okay music. I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. They actually got it to work. But out of his pocket, he takes a bottle of hot sauce, right? And he starts chugging it live on stage. And you could just hear the music go wild, and everyone was like, oh, wow, this is like, you could hear the music begin to change as he's chugging this hot sauce. And that's probably one of the best demos I've seen so far. And I think that they got to third place, you know, even though they didn't really have like the kind of the wider impact or how feasible for real world implementation, they knocked it out of the park with technical difficulty because it was machine learning. And, you know, there's just the straight novelty of seeing a guy chug, you know, see music done to a guy who's chugging, you know, hot sauce live on stage, right? And so I'd say that's about, you know, I think about everything that I wanted to cover for things like that. They'll have the closing ceremony and they'll give out the tracks prizes and stuff like that. But then you go home, right? So in doing so, I'm going to show the upcoming hackathons, of course. FIU, they're good friends of mine. The Shellhawks guys, they put on a good show. They're really fun. They're coming up in September. I think their deadline is the 21st, so be sure to sign up by then. There's only so many slots, so be sure to sign up. And of course, we're from UCF, right? You gotta give it up for KnightHacks. And I have 2 links from them. They have the registration form and the Discord form. I do not have a concrete deadline for when they are closing acceptances, but I heard that acceptances will begin going out next week, and they'll keep doing that until spots are closed, right? So until they're out of spots. Both of these were a lot of fun last year. I've already talked about them in detail, and I went to both. And I'd like to see you all come out there, because I'll be out there for both of those. Well, that's the end of my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. You can hit me up on any of these social media things, or I'm also on their Discord and also on ACM's Discord. And I'd like to, oh wow, I took an hour and 45 minutes. I'm looking at the timer now on the presentation. I'd like to open it up for questions if anyone has those. Let me see if I can see the chat, because if you've been doing questions, I don't think I've been seeing them up to this point. How do I enable chat? Because when I screen share, it doesn't.
We've been answering them for you, Terrell.
Oh, okay. That's great. Thank you. I do not see the chat. Participants, is that chat?
It should be next to participants.
Because I get participants and then.
Oh, if you're screen sharing, you have to click on like the ...
Oh, the ... Okay. See, I see. Oh, chat. There we go. Thank you. Let's see. What is my favorite project for hackathons? Oh, what do you mean by that exactly? Like the favorite project that I worked on, or like kind of favorite area to? Oh man, there's so many good ones. I think that my favorite one would probably have to be Airspace, the one I worked on at Reality Hack, because it ended up being the, what's it called, the defining moment, or kind of like where I decided that I wanted to do human-computer interaction, do augmented reality and virtual reality. And it was a lot of fun, working on that, getting to work with cutting-edge hardware. It was great. Yeah. Let's see, what are some examples of fun activities done in digital hackathons that you've been to? Oh, did I not list those? Oh, sorry. There was the yoga, karaoke. Those are really fun to take breaks from. I think I've seen meditation. I mentioned, I think, the Nerf gun wars. Actually, one of my favorite favorite moments in hackathons was, I was eating lunch and they forgot to put on the schedule, so there was actually a surprise piano recital by Piano Forte, Hack GT's piano club, and they were playing a lot of nice piano songs. It was nice to have some live music to eat with. One thing I've noticed is that they have the chat, right? But I think, if you're comfortable doing so, you can try and unmute yourself and ask your questions directly, right?
Terrell, real quick,
Yes.
that Camilla clarified her question. She's wondering it's for digital.
Oh, digital. Sorry, digital. Okay, I haven't done as many digital hackathons. Sorry. Okay. There's a few that I've been to. At Penn Apps, I got to do code words. That was fun. I got to be like what's called the spy master, where you have like, I guess, like a word grid, and you have to kind of give hints towards your team to have them select their correct words without having them select the enemy team words, or like I think there's a bomb word where you instantly lose. I think one of the I think the best one that I've done though was they did a werewolf, actually. So like werewolf is a social deduction game where different people are like villagers or werewolves, and then you're trying to figure out as the villagers who are the werewolves, and the werewolves are trying to beat all the villagers, right? I believe that for KnightHacks, I'm not sure what we have lined up for them, but I think we'll be doing yoga, or they're working on it, right?
Correct. Yoga, we're working on MS Paint Bob Ross. We're gonna stream a
Ooh.
Bob Ross video and everybody tries to paint it in Microsoft Paint.
That
So
sounds
we're
like a lot of
working,
fun.
yeah, we're working on some fun social events. We're also planning on having we're going to be using like a digital conference platform. We're not going to be like in a Zoom the whole time, but we can set up like lounges, and we're planning on having like a video game lounge where if you have, for instance, like if you have Animal Crossing, you can play Animal Crossing with other hackathon attendees and like visit each other's islands or play Smash Brothers over the internet or something like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. We actually did do Werewolf. Like I didn't do it in person. Actually, that was they set up a Telegram group, because Telegram has this option to integrate like chatbots, and we actually had this like Telegram chatbot moderator that was helping us run Werewolf, and it was a lot easier than in person actually, because it runs automatically. And there's like it's different. There's an interesting dynamic where you can't see people's faces directly, so you actually have to just go based on the way they write things, and it's actually a lot harder and very interesting. Among Us, I haven't tried it, but it does look very fun. Someone asked, what is virtual like? Okay, yeah, so virtual is interesting. I guess I'll talk a little bit about the differences between virtual and physical. I will definitely recommend that if you can, try the in-person ones. I think a lot of the fun comes from that. But there are definitely a lot of advantages to doing virtual. Like you can do and meet people. Like I think one of the ones I did virtually was that I hadn't talked about before was one in Kentucky, right? I don't think I would have been as willing to go out to a random hackathon in the middle of Kentucky, but I did, and I got to meet some cool people there, right? I think that was KnightHacks. For the virtual, it's nice that you get to sleep in a real bed. That's a good one. That's a very, very important one. Most of the time I'm sleeping on the ground, or actually I had the airbed, and that's still kind of uncomfortable. So even at I think at NYU, one of my friends there, I was like, oh, I had to stay at your apartment because I asked her, and she was nice enough to let me do that because they had an extra a couch over there, right? Let's see. Are there any other questions that I might have missed?
Since you can't compete anymore, do you want to give us your project ideas so that we can build them at our next hackathon?
That is, let me see if I have, oops.
I think actually, Carol, you can still compete because you're less than a year from graduating, right?
Yeah, at some of them, yes. I think Shell Hacks I would have been eligible to compete, but I've been enjoying the mentor and judging side. It's a lot less stressful also. But I figure once I begin my master's, I'll probably come back around to competing. But until then, because right now I'm just doing a grad cert, so I'm doing graduate coursework, but I'm not. It's a non-degree option, so I'm not really a fully matriculated student. So it's a weird, complicated technicality, right? But the vast majority of hackathons actually only take current undergrad or grad students. I suppose that if you're really incented on continuing to compete, you could probably clarify with them, ask them for an exception and be like, okay, I graduated recently, can I still compete? I think most of them would say yes. But I've been enjoying the mentoring and judging side, so I think I'll stay, do my tour out there for now and enjoy that a bit, right?
Real quick, if you're coming to KnightHacks, you're eligible to compete if you are a current student or if you are less than a year from graduation, if anybody has that question.
Okay, let's see. Thank you for the lovely presentation. Thank you for all for coming. Yeah. What am I mastering in? I'm planning on doing more stuff in human-computer interaction. So I think there are dedicated masters for that. I believe Carnegie Mellon has one. MIT has one in the media lab for the masters in arts and sciences. But there's also, it would probably just be a general master's in computer science is probably where I'll end up doing it. Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh yeah, make sure you're in the Discords, hang out with us, Thank you. So I guess if anyone has any other questions, I think I think there is a feedback form. I don't know if they've given that out already. There is a sign-in form as well. Please fill those out. This is my 101 Alpha talk, right? This is the first time giving it. So if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. I'm always looking to improve, right?
Yeah, if you have, we do have a feedback form. If you go to knighthacks.org/feedback, we are collecting feedback there. We really appreciate it. If you could it should take you like 5 minutes. If you can go and fill out the feedback form at knighthacks.org/feedback.
Okay. Well, if you do come up with any more questions, I have my social media here. You can hit me up on any of those. Probably the easiest would be, I'd say, maybe LinkedIn or Discord. That would be my recommendation, but I do have the others if you are more comfortable with something else. If you want to see the things I've worked on before, I have my dev post. It's also IBM Z2REL, and that's kind of get an idea for projects. But I don't know, if you're having problems with ideation, I'll be a mentor at Shellhacks and KnightHacks. You can definitely ask me. And if you have an idea already, I can help you kind of work through, does this, what is your minimum viable concept? Does this really fit, scope-wise for a hackathon, things like that, right? But thanks again to KnightHacks and ACM and ACM-W for having me. So I think that's about it.
Thank you so much, Terrell. Thank you so much, Terrell, for presenting. Everybody silently clap.
Digital round of applause.
Digital round of applause.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah.